You are listening to the Sex and Psychology Podcast, the sex ed you never got in school and won't get anywhere else. I am your host, Dr. Justin Lehmiller. I am a social psychologist and research fellow at the Kinsey Institute and author of the book, Tell Me What You Want, The Science of Sexual Desire and How It Can Help You Improve Your Sex Life. Most people say they want deeper relationships and more meaningful connection in their lives. But in everyday life, many conversations stay stuck at the surface level, talking about work, schedules, the weather, or whatever else feels safe. So why is it so hard to move beyond small talk? And what actually makes a conversation feel connecting, intimate, and memorable? Today, we're exploring the science of meaningful conversation, from curiosity and attention to vulnerability, flirting, and emotional openness. We'll also discuss why deeper conversations are usually less awkward than we expect, and how small shifts in the way we communicate can dramatically improve our relationships. I am joined once again by Nicholas Epley, the John Templeton Keller Distinguished Service Professor of Behavior Science and the Director of the Roman Family Center for Decision Research at the University of Chicago Booth School of Business. Nicholas is author of the book Mindwise: How We Understand What Others Think, Believe, Feel, and Want. And his latest book is A Little More Social: How Small Choices Create Unexpected Happiness, Health, and Connection. This is going to be another fascinating conversation that you won't want to miss. Stick around, and we're going to jump in right after the break. Do you want to learn more from me in the form of an online or in-person course? Become Sexceptional by getting certified with Sexual Health Alliance, where you can learn from yours truly and a number of top sexuality scholars. Each year with Sexual Health Alliance, I teach courses like Fantasies Around the World, as well as immersive study abroad classes in several exciting countries. Join these programs and become a certified sexuality professional at the same time. From sex therapists to sex educators, sex coaches to sexologists, Sexual Health Alliance streamlines your path to certification while allowing you to learn from leading experts in the field. Most importantly, you'll gain the knowledge, skills, and credentials that you need to excel. Become Sexceptional and connect with world-class experts and an engaged community of sexuality professionals from all across the globe. Start your path to certification today at sexualhealthalliance.com. Okay, Nicholas, let's talk about moving beyond small talk. So you write about how most people crave deeper connections, yet they often remain stuck at the surface level. So talk to me about that. Why do so many conversations stay stuck in that zone of just talking about the weather or your work, even when both people might actually want something more meaningful?
So at least one thing we find, there's surely multiple reasons, but one thing we find is that people tend to think that they're more interested in having these conversations than other people are. Just like they think often they're more interested or would be more open to having a conversation with a stranger than strangers might be in having a conversation with them. And that's a barrier that can keep you from going deeper almost every time. If you think that this person doesn't really want to have this conversation, if you both think that, you won't ever have a more meaningful conversation. And so I think that's a big one. I don't think it's so much that we don't know how to have these conversations if we tried. That's often a common presumed barrier. But in our research, when we ask people to write down some questions you would talk to someone about, if you were just getting them to know them, okay, now set those aside. Now write down some questions that you might ask if you were going to go a little deeper, have a more meaningful conversation with somebody. Write those questions down. People can do that. They don't have any trouble doing that as far as we can tell. And the deeper questions they come up with are pretty good. And when we then randomly assign them to either talk about the typical questions they ask or the deeper questions they came up with and could ask but typically don't, they actually enjoy the conversations about the deeper questions that they generated but just wouldn't have asked otherwise. Mm-hmm. Right? So I have faith in your listeners, just like I have faith in myself and many other people too, that you're probably a better conversationalist than you give yourself credit for. I think you can do this. And the barrier then is thinking that other people don't want to. And that's something that's just worth testing, right? Sometimes people might not want to have a deeper conversation with you, but I think you will be surprised. At least our data suggests you're likely to be surprised that when, I ask you, Justin, hey, we're in this cab together. If you could be anywhere else right now in the world, where would you want to be, right? Or ask you, what's your job? What do you do for a living? And is this what you always wanted to do for a living? Is this your dream job, right? If it's not your dream job, why are you doing this rather than something else? We can do these things, I think, if we give it a shot.
Yeah. All of this has me thinking about whether there are cross-cultural differences here, because I find that it's easier to have those deeper conversations when I'm, for example, traveling in Europe than when I'm here in the States. And I think part of it is because here, the cultural script is it always goes to work. Like, what do you do for a living?
And you just can't get yourself out of that.
Yeah. But in Europe, nobody ever asks you about your job or what you do for a living. Like, that's not the norm, the standard. You're not defined by your profession or career in the same way that you are here. And so I find it's often easier when I'm traveling to kind of have those conversations that move beyond the surface level. But I don't know, maybe it's just me.
That's an interesting idea. It's actually not something I'd thought about, where the norms about what you talk about might differ meaningfully. There certainly are cross-cultural differences in this. There are differences within cultures for this too, right? So, you might not talk to a stranger on a train or a plane. You might not have a deep conversation with a stranger, say, but you'll have a deep conversation with a friend. You'll talk to a friend if they sat down next to you on a plane, right? Or if you go to a networking event, you'll talk to people there. Or if you go to a bar, you'll talk to people there, right? So even across situations within cultures, there are meaningful differences. And I think what explains the differences there are differences in expectations about how others will respond to this and kind of what's appropriate in that moment. And so you're just more willing to be more social in some places because you think, that's what we're supposed to do here. And other people will then respond well to that, right? And you don't check whether you could be wrong in other circumstances. And my prediction would then be that that's also what varies around across cultures as well. Some places folks are more talkative than others. My prediction is that what varies across cultures is not the experience of social interaction. As far as we know, wanting to be connected and being happier and healthier when you are connected is a cultural universal. We don't find meaningful differences in that dimension. The places where folks aren't particularly social are also the loneliest places on the planet, right? Mm-hmm. I think what differs are people's beliefs about social interaction. And that's, I think, what varies across cultures. So if you go to Spain, folks just think it's more okay and normal and accepted to reach out and have a conversation with a stranger than they do, say, in Finland, where people are a little quieter, or in Japan, where people might think it's rude or impolite to talk to a stranger, and so folks don't do it. But if you try, in these cases, I think most would find that it's quite good, even around the globe. We're just starting to do that research now. We found similar effects, for instance, in China, underestimating how well deep conversations would go as we did in the United States. But that's work we're just starting. And so hypotheses have yet to be tested across lots of cultures.
This also has me thinking about cultural differences in norms around just sort of how you interact with somebody you first meet in terms of like the physical distance or physical contact between you. Like, for example, I was in Paris recently teaching a study abroad course, and several of the people that I met there leaned in and gave me a kiss on both cheeks, right? And that doesn't happen here in the States.
As an Iowan, that makes me uncomfortable, right? We don't do that. But it's not that I don't like it. Like, you feel really connected to those people. But yeah, it's not a common thing.
Yeah, I mean, here in the States, it's much more common if there's any physical contact that it's just going to be a handshake. And handshakes are just always awkward. It just always feels a little bit weird. And in terms of like, well, you want to grip this person's hand, but not too hard. And so like you start overthinking it, and it's a whole thing. But it's different, like in terms of the cultural norms that might also foster this ability to just feel more closeness or connection with other people. So I think there's lots of fertile ground for research here.
One thing I think that's worth noting, though, too, is that some of this is under your control, right? You don't want to make other people feel uncomfortable. But I was up in rural Wisconsin this last weekend. We own a little summer cabin where my wife grew up. And I was meeting with a farmer neighbor out there who helps me with some land that we own, planting trees and growing tall grass prairie and stuff. And I saw him at the end of the driveway where our woods are. And I ran up to him, and he sticks his hand out. I come in, I give him a great big hug, right? And as I'm coming in, he goes, whoa, like that. But he still gives me a hug. And I still kind of enjoyed feeling connected in that way. It wasn't creepy or uncomfortable. It was just kind and nice. And I do think you have some control over that, to be kind and open and honest with other people in that way, authentic with them. And I think people don't always take the power that they have to be really kind and loving to other people that you could have in ways that actually make other folks feel really good to be treated as a friend or somebody who you're close to rather than somebody who you're more distant from. That feels good.
So, I think part of the reason so many of us just stick to small talk is because that's all we know. We're used to, we just ask, how are you? It's a beautiful day, isn't it? Or how was work? There's this small subset of questions that we just kind of go to because it's easy. So what can we ask instead? What are some better questions than how's work or how's the weather?
Yeah. So I will say those are not necessarily bad places to start. So one thing that psychologists are learning is that those small talk questions are kind of trying to establish something to talk about, some common ground to talk about. And they can work well for that. But psychologists also long thought, I think like most of us intuitively do, that you need a lot of time to get deeper with someone. And that, I think, just turns out not to be true. So a very famous study in psychology by Art and Elaine Aron created this procedure known as the Fast Friends procedure. It was made famous by a New York Times article written by Mandy Len Canton about the 36 questions that will lead you to love anyone or something of that sort. And Art and Elaine Aron thought you needed this long runway. It's like a 747 taking off on a runway. You needed 36 questions to get deep. Our data suggests you need like 2. It can be much more like a helicopter ride than a 747 takeoff and go quite well. In fact, in our research, when we ask people to ask deep questions right up front, they enjoy it much more than they expect. So you can start with a small thing like, hey, where do you work, Justin? You tell me. And I can then ask you, do you love what you do? Right? Now notice right there, I've gone from this thing outside of you, what do you do, to something that's right at the center of your heart. Do you love what you do? I ask you a question about emotion, right? About something meaningful to you, right? Or I can go from a what question, what is it you do, to a why question. What gets to your motivations? Well, why do you do that? I can also go to something that's more about not some like objective quality of you, but to something about your thoughts or beliefs. So what is it you do for a living? Is it what you've always wanted to do? Right now, right there, I've gone to kind of goals and hopes and aspirations. And so by moving from this question about something outside of you to something that's inside of you, you can get deep really, really quickly. The other thing that I love to ask, and I mentioned this in our other episode, I love to ask people what their story is. Who are you, Justin? And when I ask people that, they get it. Like they're not wondering, what's my story? I don't know. They kind of get what I'm asking them is tell me who you are, what matters to you. I just love to know. And you can do that just on your first question if you want. So I do think that you're right that there are scripts and habits that we get into that don't necessarily create the conversations that we want to be having, but we think we're powerless to change it. Mm-hmm. You're not powerless to change it. You control the conversation every bit as much as the other person does. And if you're not having the conversation you want, don't let some mistaken belief about what the other person wants keep you and the other person from having a better conversation. Go there. Ask the meaningful question. Bill Nye, famous science guy, once said, every person you ever meet knows something you don't. And he's right about that. Mm-hmm. Everybody's got an interesting story to tell you. Sometimes it'll blow you away what people have to tell you. You just wouldn't believe it, right? But you don't find out unless you ask them about it.
So it's all about learning the art of the pivot, right? In terms of what are your follow-up questions and the questions that are going to elicit some degree of vulnerability, right? Because that's really what the 36 questions that lead to love does, is it progressively goes deeper. And as you progress through the question deck, you're asking questions that require some amount of self-disclosure. And that's how we develop intimacy with other people, is through that mutual, gradual, reciprocal self-disclosure process. But in terms of asking those questions that create vulnerability, right? How do we navigate that sort of tightrope between being vulnerable but not over disclosing, right? Because a lot of people worry about when you're having these initial conversations with someone, they don't want to come on too strong, they don't want to disclose too much, they don't want to get hurt, right? So how do we sort of walk that tightrope of vulnerability?
So I think the key again is questioning whether you've got the location of that tightrope right. Research shows just over and over again that other people respond better to self-disclosure, to what you would think of as vulnerability, better than we would imagine, right? Who do we disclose meaningful stuff to? Typically to our friends, right? And when you disclose something meaningful to the other person, you're treating them like a friend. You're showing them that you trust them. And that tends to be valued and appreciated. And they tend to respond back favorably. Now, one important caveat to this is that this kind of self-disclosure generally works best when you're in a dyadic interaction. Mm-hmm. If you're broadcasting, it doesn't necessarily work quite as well. That can be a little bit trickier. But certainly in my own life, when I'm talking to people, when you are honest with them, true with them, meaning that you say stuff that's real. And sometimes that can be painful stuff. Sometimes that's joyful stuff. They tend to respond much better than I suspect many people would expect. This is true whether you're revealing something negative about yourself. As we find in our research, we find that revealing negative secrets about yourself isn't evaluated as negatively as you'd imagine by the other person. This is true in relationships where you are being open and honest about a problem you're having in your relationship that needs to be taken care of. That tends to be received in conversation better than people expect. And this is also true when we're being open about our successes even. Bragging is what we think of it as, right? That when we are open and honest with another person about something good that has happened to us, it signals that we're trusting them with this information. And by hiding it, by not being open and honest with somebody, by not being willing to disclose something, by not being willing to be quote unquote vulnerable, we are also signaling to the person that we don't trust them and that we're being dishonest with them. And nobody likes that, right? So I think the language around vulnerability is a little bit wrong in the sense that by opening up, we're not actually being as likely to be hurt or damaged as we might imagine that we are. In fact, it often goes the opposite way.
So in terms of navigating these conversations, one thing that seems increasingly rare today is giving somebody your full attention during a conversation. People are checking their phones, they're thinking about what to say next, or mentally they're just someplace else. So how important is attention in terms of making somebody else feel connected and understood? And how good are we at detecting when another person doesn't fully have our attention?
There's really interesting research in the world of conversations. I'm thinking of Emma Templeton as a postdoc at Dartmouth, who's going to be joining us here at the University of Chicago on the faculty next year, has done about the importance of attention in conversation. And it's shockingly important, it turns out. And we're very sensitive to this. Whether we're good at detecting whether somebody's actually paying attention to us or not is a different question. But we're extremely sensitive to signals about whether somebody's paying attention or not. And this shows up most clearly, I think, in conversation when you're talking with another person. Because what's interesting about conversation is that it goes back and forth at lightning speed, right? So when you and I talk, you're communicating with me right now. You're nodding your head, right? You're jumping in with a right every now and then. When I stop talking, you'll jump in and start talking right away. In fact, turns. So when one person stops talking, another person takes the turn and starts talking now. The delay between stopping and starting on average is about 250 milliseconds, which is a little longer than it takes to blink an eye, but not very long, right? There's no over and out walkie-talkie kind of language we have to use for the other person to know when to speak. And what Emma has learned in her research is that the speed of that delay, even by hundreds of milliseconds, can signal to us, right? That slightly overly long pause can signal to us that the other person is not paying attention to this. And we are extremely sensitive to this. right?
Mhm.
So even just adding a short 300 millisecond delay in a turn, somebody responding to us, can lead us to think that the other person is not really paying attention to us. They're not really that interested in us, right? Whereas speeding somebody up, right, so that they're responding right away can make us think, oh, that person's really engaged. They're on top of this. Even speaking over somebody can signal attention because it shows that you, in fact, are thinking about what I'm going to say before I finish saying it. Right? So we're very sensitive to that in conversation.
Yeah, I've been there many times, where you're having those conversations and even just that slight pause, like it starts to feel really awkward. And it's like, well, that conversation's done. How do I get out of this situation?
Yeah, right.
And that's
The
sort of where our
split-second
mind
delay.
goes. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's amazing how just that really short pause in a conversation can create that immediate feeling of awkwardness, and I think that's something too that, where there might also be some cross-cultural differences, right? Where I think we're culturally conditioned to kind of think that if there's any pause or lull in the conversation, that necessarily means they're not paying attention and we have to be constantly talking in order to have a connection. But, it can also be nice to have a relationship with someone where you can just sit there in silence, right?
You just be, right. Or if somebody's thinking,
Mhm.
right, they can be thinking and there will then be a delay. Now, one thing I'd be a little bit careful about is we don't really know how well people actually interpret these cues.
Mhm.
So you could be a little slower responding because you're not paying attention to somebody or because you're really thinking about the person's response and trying to figure out how to respond to them. We are very confident in our perceptions of what's going on in the mind of another person. But if there's anything that I've learned over 25 years of doing this work, it's that we're overconfident in that ability, right?
Mhm.
So even when there's a delay in conversation, keep trying a little bit and see if you keep getting that signal. If you don't, you might just be a one-off signal. Don't overinterpret that signal, I would say.
So I'm curious how your work connects to flirting, right? So good flirting is not about delivering the perfect line. It's about curiosity, responsiveness, attention, and, sort of cultivating a feeling of connection. So do the same psychological principles that just make conversations with strangers meaningful, do they also make us more attractive to one another?
I would think so, because usually the cues that lead us to like somebody in conversation or to enjoy the conversation is that the other person's taken an interest in us, that they're engaged with us, that they're validating us in some way. They're seeing us and learning from us and asking follow-up questions about us, which, as Alison Wood Brooks at Harvard Business School and others have shown, is really important for making conversations go well. The person who has the follow-up questions is the person who is liked in conversation because they seem to be taking an interest in you. And when people take an interest in us, we tend to like them, right? And I don't think that's any different for talking with strangers as it is for starting a romantic relationship.
And I would agree with that. So one thing I really appreciate about your book is that you do this really well where you're talking about the science and data and research and making it accessible, but you're also giving practical information and takeaways in terms of how we can actually use and apply this information in our everyday lives. Something you talk about is how meaningful connection doesn't necessarily require huge life changes, right? Sometimes it's just choosing to ask one more question, to stay in the conversation a little bit longer, or to open up slightly more than usual. So what are some of the small shifts that we can make in our everyday life that can make a real difference in terms of just how connected we feel to other people?
Here's one super simple one. Walk around with your head up and say hi to people. I've been shocked by how powerful that can be. I've made a habit of that walking into the building here at the University of Chicago, or just when I'm around town. Instead of walking to my office with my head down trying to get there, I take note of people and I say hi to them. And I've gotten to know so many people that way who I otherwise wouldn't have gotten to know. When I go grocery shopping, for instance, I will do this, just say hi to folks. It just makes the mood a little brighter, right? If you want people to say hello to you more often, be friendly with you, the way to do it is to be friendly with them first, right? My daughter, who's 10 years old, Lindsay, who I talk about some in the book, she has Down syndrome. She has no filter on her hello. She goes around and lifts people up all the time, and they respond in a way that's so positive So that's a very simple thing. The Ritz-Carlton famously referred to this kind of practice as the 10-5 rule, and they put it into their hotels, maybe a little apocryphal. It's not obvious that it started with the Ritz-Carlton, but they certainly did it for a long time, to create a more hospitable environment. They trained their staff that when someone was 10 feet away, you smiled at them, and when someone was 5 feet away, you said hello. You put that into practice, the world will be a little brighter, right? It's not a big thing, but your moments will be a little bit better. Right? You never know who you might meet that way. So that's one. The other thing that I think you can do easily is take an interest in other people. Once you take an interest in other people, you start noticing things you hadn't noticed before. Like, I noticed you could be an awesome beard model, right? And I could say that to you. I could pass along that compliment and would lift you up and I'd feel better in return, right? I notice nice things to compliment people about, and it makes those moments brighter for them and for me too. I notice things that I can do sometimes that would be kind for someone, right? Just even noticing a graduate student here as a faculty member can be really uplifting for somebody who's in a hard spot in their lives. And when you take an interest in other people, you start noticing stuff. And then the last thing that I might suggest that could be small but worth doing more often is to ask for help when you need it. This is one where people are concerned about looking weak or incompetent at something. We worry too much about our competency. Other people tend to evaluate us in terms of our warmth. And when you ask somebody for help, right, that's a sign that you trust them. You admire them enough to help you and that you're honest with them about something that you need. You also give other people an opportunity to be kind to you. And it turns out that being kind to other people generally makes us feel good. And if people can do the thing you ask them for, they also feel competent. Right? Ben Franklin realized this. He said, if you want to make lots of friends, go out and ask people to help you because they will, and then they will like you more after they help you. We find that in our work as well, but we also find that people underestimate how willing other people are to help them when they ask. I've actually come to see not asking someone for help as cruelty, as being unkind to somebody, because it's keeping them from doing something nice for me that they could do quite easily that would be helpful and would leave them feeling better. Not asking for help when you need it is unkind. And I think we could do better at that too.
I think part of this that's also important is actually being present when we're in social settings so that we can even be open to other people's attempts to connect with us. For example, I know a lot of us, myself included, are chronic multitaskers. Like when I'm out taking a walk or I'm at the gym or I'm at the grocery store, I have my AirPods in and I'm listening to an audiobook. And so I'm just like kind of closed off from the world around me in a lot of those opportunities where you'd have those organic connections. And so it's a shift that we have to make, a choice we have to make in our daily lives where when we're in those social settings, maybe we shouldn't always be multitasking so that we can just even be open to the possibility of connection.
Here's an interesting way to think about it. All of our choices are trade-offs in life, right? We're trying to do multiple things at once, right? You'd like to listen to that audiobook. That's a good thing for you to do, right? Our data don't suggest you shouldn't be doing those things, that you should be talking to people all the time. They don't suggest that. They suggest you underestimate the likelihood that connecting with other people will be positive and leave you feeling better, right? And I think that means that would make our choices a little bit differently. All of our choices are gambles on the future. And if you're underestimating how well it'll turn out when you reach out to connect with other people, you'll be choosing to do it a little less often than might be optimal for your own well-being. So when you walk out, in the morning, you're feeling a little bit crummy. You're just kind of in a funk. That's when talking to somebody might be a really good thing to lift your spirits a little bit, engaging with somebody in that moment. And then, set your audiobook aside for another time when you're feeling great and you don't need that uplift. I think that's a way to think about it, perhaps.
Yeah, I think that's all great advice and information. Thank you so much for sharing all of this with us, Nicholas. It was truly a pleasure to have you here. Can you please tell my listeners where they can go to learn more about you and your work and get a copy of your new book?
So you can find my book anywhere you buy your books. Book is a little more social. You can find more about my research at my website, nicholasepley.com. And I also have a LinkedIn page that I play around with sometimes. Generally, social media makes me miserable and I struggle to find time. We have 5 kids and so life's pretty busy. But sometimes I play around with LinkedIn and so you can find me there too.
Well, I think that's also another point we could have talked about, which is if you want to be a little bit more social, maybe spend a little less time on social media.
That's exactly right, which is not always so social.
Yeah. Well, thank you again so much for your time. I really appreciate having you here.
Absolutely. Thank you, Justin.
Thank you for listening. To keep up with new episodes of this podcast, visit my website, Sex and Psychology, at sexandpsychology.com, or subscribe on your favorite platform, where I hope you'll take a moment to rate and review the show. If you listen on Apple Podcasts, please consider becoming a Sex and Psychology Premium subscriber to enjoy ad-free listening for just $3.99 a month. You can also follow me on social media for daily sex research updates. I'm on Blue Sky and X at Justin Lehmiller and Instagram at Justin J. Lehmiller. Also, be sure to check out my book, Tell Me What You Want. Thanks again for listening. Until next time.